encountered an absolute blockbuster investigation into US-led coalition actions in Iraq. I think it was 18 months and then that investigation. Phenomenal, meticulous, field-based investigative work. One of the key conclusions of which was that civilian harm from US-led strikes was up to 30 times greater than the coalition itself was admitted to. And I wanted to start, and then just throwing it to you and saying, how difficult a sell was that to the New York Times? Were they your original partner from the beginning, or did they bring them in later? And how important and challenging for you was it to make sure that the field research on the ground in Iraq underpinned those findings?
They were not the original outlet. Actually, we cycled through like 4 or 5 different places, and for various reasons they all fell through. Initially because when we had the idea of doing sort of a large sample, so the article is based on visits to 103 airstrike sites, and so requires a significant investment, journalistic and resource investment. And so it's very hard to go to an outlet and say, hey, we're going to go look at 103 places. Can you support us for the next 3 years and do that? So for various reasons, we kind of went through different outlets. And by the time we got to the Times, we'd actually finished a lot of the ground research.
Were you self-funding, effectively?
No, no. Actually, what happened was we were with Matter Studios, which was an outlet that sadly folded, but had funded sort of everything we had done up to that point.
And I raised that point of this absence of field reporting in Iraq, and the fact that there just hadn't really been any comprehensive coverage prior to your investigation. I mean, some of that began just before you were published because of the Battle of Mosul.
Yeah.
How surprised were you to find that just nobody had been to these communities that you were visiting, or is that just part of the course that the reporters don't go these days to these communities?
It was surprising. If you compare it to the Afghan war, where I spent a lot of time, or even the previous iteration of the Iraq war, the amount of media attention on the anti-ISIS war in Iraq was almost nothing. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that it was ISIS, and there was a sense among people that, well, all bets are off because this is ISIS, and we're not going to really push too hard on what's happening on the ground. There was nobody on the ground, and we would go to small towns and villages, and these places had, even places that had been liberated from ISIS 6 months or a year before we had gotten there, and sort of everything was still in a state of destruction. Nobody had moved anything, nobody had moved the rubble, and nobody had come there to interview people. And what made Iraq even more challenging, I guess, than Syria, where I also work, is that in Syria because of the Syrian revolution, there's a very active local media network, sort of civilian journalists in every little town. So you can actually follow the Syrian conflict in almost granular detail from afar in a way that you can't do in Iraq. So you can know when, who the factions are in a particular town, when specific incidents happen. You can go on Facebook and reach out to people in that town. In Iraq, that dynamic isn't there, so it's even more important to be able to go on the ground to talk to people.
So, Kayara, one of the towns that you focus on, you found a significant number of events there that were potentially caused by the US-led coalition, but there were some challenges, particularly in Iraq, because of the complexity of the fighting as well. You had not just the coalition, you had Iraqi forces, you had very heavy action by ISIS, sometimes involving heavy weaponry. How did you unpick that violence? There's rarely doubt that civilian harm has occurred. How were you able to determine US-led coalition responsibility?
So the usual model up till then, insofar as one existed, was that if there was an allegation in the media, or if there was an allegation of a civilian casualty, it would be forwarded to the coalition. So what they were looking at were accusations of civilian harm. And often they would come back and say, we didn't bomb in this area, or we have no record of involvement in this area, and that would be the end of it. So what we decided to do was a little different, is instead of looking at allegations of civilian casualties, we would actually study impact sites. Which means that we went to Kayara, this town, it was like 30,000 people, a small town, and we went house to house and looked at every single impact site. and first to determine, okay, was it ground artillery or was it air power? And second, to determine whose air force was it, because there's two different air forces above Iraq. There's the coalition and there's the Iraqi Air Force. And we wanted to focus on the coalition side just because it would be easier to get answers for what had happened. So there's sort of this two-tier process to figure out for each site whether it was from the ground or the air. And by the way, it turned out it didn't matter if it was from the ground or the air because the coalition counts ground artillery as part of their airstrikes. They just call it strikes. But we didn't know that initially, so we were actually doing a lot of work to try to distinguish those two. And then second, to see if it was Iraqi or coalition. And then what we did is, for each site, we then forwarded those coordinates to the coalition and simply asked them, did you bomb this area or not? So many of those places, in fact, the majority of those places were places where civilians didn't die, right? There were places, either there's empty structures that are hit or there are ISIS targets that are hit. But we didn't actually ask them about the nature of what they were trying to hit. We just said, did you strike this area or not? And by doing that, I think we maybe activated a different mechanism within the bureaucracy of who would respond to these questions and what kind of answers they would give. And so we ended up getting back, so in total 103 sites, we ended up getting back 103 yes or no answers, basically. Yes, we hit this place, or no, we didn't. And their criteria for whether it was yes or no was how close in their logs, how close they have ammunition following to the GPS coordinates that we've given. And it was somewhat of an arbitrary distinction. They said if it's beyond 50 meters, then if we have in our logs a strike that was 50 meters away or greater from your GPS location, then we're going to say that it wasn't us. Okay, 50 meters is very close, by the way. So then we took that information and kind of went back and looked at the places they said they hit or didn't hit. And what was interesting was that even places they said they didn't hit, meaning it was 100, 200, 300 meters away, they actually had uploaded video of them striking the location. So there's a water treatment facility which they uploaded a video showing them hitting it, but then they told us that they didn't hit it because their ammunition was more than 50 meters away. I think it was 200 or 300 meters away in that case. So it turned out that the logs themselves were inaccurate, or incomplete at least, which is very important for exactly one of the reasons you're saying is when people forward allegations to the coalition, what they do is they'll look on their logs and say, okay, did we hit this place or not? And often they just come back and say, no, we didn't hit this place because there's no record of us striking there. But if their records themselves are incomplete, then it calls into question the entire process.
The central family in your investigation, I mean, we knew about the deaths of those family members within 24 hours of that event actually happening. A local activist group in Mosul had reported out the deaths. Family members had already reached out, and it took more than 18 months, almost 2 years, for the coalition to concede those fatalities. And they'd even actually posted a video of the coalition boasting of the ISIS headquarters they destroyed, which were actually the family homes. This question of ignoring what local communities themselves are saying, the fact that we often do get good quality information out from these locations, but we choose not to engage with it. How frustrating was that for you? And was that what drove that placing that family so centrally to your investigation, getting someone to acknowledge responsibility for what had obviously gone terribly wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it took us 18 months basically to get an answer, and it's exactly what you were alluding to. Is that the only reason we got an answer because we were the New York Times, and we had come to them at the end. I mean, Bassem had tried himself multiple times to get answers from the coalition. He went to the U.S. Embassy. He had written to various U.S. officials. He had used friends in the United States to write on his behalf, and he was essentially stonewalled at every turn. And we got involved about a year or so after the strike, and at the point that we got involved, then it started to move much more rapidly. From his perspective, it had been, at that point, it had been a year, and then finally, when the final answers came, it was 18 months. And also, one of the things we wanted to uncover was exactly why his house was struck. So he has a big house in eastern Mosul, and it was bombed in the middle of the night. And as Chris said, the coalition put up a video afterwards saying that they had struck an IED factory, ISIS IED factory. In fact, they had struck his house. And Bassem wanted compensation, but he also wanted some sort of closure. He wanted answers for why this had happened, just for himself, but also because he needed to protect himself against the Iraqi authorities who could come afterwards and accuse him of being an ISIS supporter. Right. And there was an internal investigation that was done on the strike, and we FOIA'd the investigation. But normally, to get these FOIAs, it takes like over a year, 2 to 3 years. And so we had to try all sorts of strategies to speed up the process. And so we were able to demonstrate, in his case, that this information is really important actually for his safety, because if he's under suspicion of being an ISIS supporter, that any information that might exonerate him was actually going to protect him. So because of that, we were able to, kind of a unique circumstance, actually get the FOIA process within like 2 or 3 months, which is like a world record, I think. And, but since having done that, now there's, of all the other airstrikes that we've documented, there's hundreds of other victims, hundreds of other people who would like to have answers for themselves, and also the same protection afforded to them. But now I think that the coalition is wise to our strategy of how to get the FOIAs quickly. And so it's unlikely that we're going to be able to get the other 100 or so that we've submitted in the same time frame. So my reporting partner is actually suing the US government now to try to speed up the process of getting these documents.